If anyone serves me, the Father will honour him. This great martyr, Lawrence, who had a frightful torture at the end, slowly roasted to death on a gridiron because of the fury of the authorities, who had been frustrated because they wanted him apart to have the money of the church. He being the main deacon of Rome, he was indeed kept apart from the group that he was caught with at the altar, actually. The Pope, Sixtus II, and other deacons. But it did not work, and they got to work on this atrocious martyrdom. This great saint is a model of service, a servant, diakonos, and as such is portrayed often with a dalmatic, the robe of the deacon, and with the chalice, for the deacon from the beginning was the minister of the chalice. It is well to be aware of this double role of the Levite, the deacon. He is right next to the celebrant, whether he be presbyter or bishop, and he helps. He also helps, as in the Acts of the Apostles, in the ministering tables, in practical work, hence finances enter into it. And to this day, in the Anglican structure, the archdeacon is a person who has authority over that realm. The presbyter must be free, as the Acts suggests, for the word and the prayer. And therefore the deacon is precious. He serves the poor of the church. He serves. But then this service is extended to the altar. Par excellence, that is his service, that of the Lord. And from the beginning we see that there was a structure. It is already clear in St. Ignatius of Antioch, writing only about 50 years after St. Paul. Episkopos, presbyteros, and diakonos, the bishop, priest, and deacon, are already in place. In local churches where it took a while to become clear in its evolution, there would nevertheless from the beginning have been a principal presbyter. Historians have looked always into this fluidity in the early writings, scripture writings, between this role of episkopos and presbyteros. But it is, from the beginning, part of the divine project, and the apostles find their successors there in the episkopoi. So, the deacon was always there from the beginning and never in any fluid state, clearly part of the sacrament of orders, and a specific role at the altar, being right next and serving. Others too would be there. The words that we have, acolyte, it means one who follows. Akoluthein in Greek is to follow, and he would be following with these sacred lights, which were important in the celebrations. Electricity was not there, and effects can be produced with lights. They also have to read. Without lights, one can't do an awful lot in dark situations. And so, these were there and have been there. Each has his role. In the period of the Second Vatican Council, there was a thrust to re-pristinate the fullness of the use of the diaconate. It had gone into some kind of eclipse, and its potential in the West was not fully exploited. And so we had this intuition given to the Council Fathers that it would be well to look into this question and to have the diaconate standing again on its own feet. And so, in the subsequent period, we had this possibility of the permanent diaconate, therefore not just a transient one going on to the priesthood. And also, taking people who were married, if that were the case. If they were taking non-married people, then they had to remain in their state. If they were taking married people and the wife died, they had to remain without remarrying. That's part of the ancient tradition of the Church, that after a major order, one doesn't receive the sacrament of holy matrimony after receiving it. And so this has come into play again, and we have precious helps, deacons, and a good diocese and a good parish should be able to produce at least a couple of deacons, and that would have been the way forward. Now, what happened was that things were intercepted. The natural flow of grace was hijacked, and this is how it happened. In the initial stages of the application of the renewal, there was no question of anyone who wasn't in major orders handling the Blessed Sacrament. The Missal of 1969 doesn't even mention it or think of it. In 1972, St. Paul VI made the important opening of the old minor orders to those who are going to receive them and use them fully in the document Inter Ministeria. And this was going to make of the acolyte the future subdeacon. He could actually be called a subdeacon. That's actually there, that wording. They could be called subdeacons, but it was removing the subdiaconate, which was actually an early practice. It is in early literature, we find it there. But it's not as clear as the diaconate in its apostolic origin. And the obligation of celibacy was going to be placed at the, now, for the transient diaconate, it's going to be at that point, renewed at that point in the case of those who are already in a vow of celibacy because of belonging to an order. And for those in the permanent diaconate, it would be understood that should the wife die, he would not undertake matrimony again. But the notion of the final commitment was there at the diaconate and no longer at the subdiaconate, and the acolyte would be able to take on, therefore, a permanent role as acolyte if he were not going to be ordained a priest. Now, this would have been interesting to have, as happened in some places in the early stages, the instituting of permanent lectors with also responsibilities over catechetical work and forming of others, and acolytes who would be responsible also for forming those who would be in the ministry of altar boys at the altar in the sanctuary, forming therefore these people, and also being extraordinary ministers for Holy Communion should there be a need for the sick, and also should there be a very large number of people in church. It would also be a possible useful minister should the Holy Communion be given under both kinds, which was also being looked into at the time. Now, these would have been and were initially instituted as permanent state by the bishop. And also, in the case of the acolyte, definitely would be dressed in suitable clothing, an alb or whatever, from the beginning of the celebration and in the area of the sanctuary. Therefore, a person set apart visibly, and also maintaining that visibility of being apart and being part of the sacred in the way in which, should he be called upon to help with distribution of Holy Communion, for instance in holding the chalice, then there would be a respect shown for the sacred elements. So that was what was envisioned. What happened was actually not expected. It was a backlash pushed in part, but not entirely, by those insisting on the rights of all, including therefore the female sex, to have these roles, and therefore it led to all the partners, e.g. dressing differently, being in the sanctuary from the beginning, being instituted by the bishop himself, given an ordination because that was what it was in the past, although it's clear that the character of ordination only starts with the diaconate, that this was all being short-circuited and going straight to a crash landing of people from the pew in the celebration itself, dressed in whatever they're dressed or not dressed, and coming therefore into the sanctuary area from the area of the laity, which would be actually a discontinuity with the unbroken tradition of the liturgy of the East and the West from the earliest times. Now, one is looking at this now a couple of generations on, and one sees the effect it has led to in practice, the loss of faith in the otherness and in the real presence specifically, because the way we act is the way we think, or the way we actually educate others to think. And children who have grown up in that have been taught to think that it's fairly casual. Anyone can touch what? Well, you ask. They talk about the holy bread. Faith is lost. So that leaves us in a situation where generally people of good practice and faith are called upon and chosen precisely for these new ministries, and therefore one has the best of the parish there. Generous souls who have been brought up in this atmosphere, not realizing that by accepting they are part of a problem which has been engineered by the forces that hate the Catholic Church and its very centre, the presence itself, and are acting against it. Forces, therefore, which are propelled by the mind of Lucifer, who is from within determined to destroy the Catholic Church, to take away faith in the presence, make sure that sacrilege abounds, and that God is in a situation of being head-on attacked. One cannot easily say that to a person who is in one of these ministries, but the person himself or herself might, before the Lord, in adoration perhaps, be stirred to ask the question, am I actually in the positive will of God? Because actually the truth is this, if they were waiting for an answer from the Lord himself, he would say, you're in my permissive will here, my positive will was other. And each one involved in this is unwittingly part of the problem of the acceptance of what precisely Lucifer wants. A head-on attack on the sacred. At his feet the sings swing its cherub, cherubim with sleepless eye, veil their faces to the presence, as with ceaseless voice they cry, Alleluia, 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 Lord Most High.